Well, I've braved the snow, got soaking feet, got to the workshop, and I'm going to start sowing. First sowings of the year. I'm going to start with Mokum, which is a great sort of early sweet carrot. It's not going to be my first succession of carrots because I've already got some Napoli growing that I started in late October. They're about this big now, something like that. So they're a few weeks ahead of this batch. I'm only going to do, a couple of weeks supply at a time. And all I'm doing, well, I'm using spent potato compost, which I'm going to top off with seed starting compost. So cover them with about 1 centimetre of compost. So I'm going to get on with these. So my carrot sowing technique is very unsophisticated. I basically level off the compost so that it's nice and flat. For a container this sort of size, and let me just measure that for you. It's 10 inches. I am generally putting about 20 seeds in, something like that. And I'll add in a few gaps. I'll add perhaps another 5, something like that, as spares. I just give them ideal spacing. I don't put multiple seeds into a station and then thin them out or anything like that. I find that germination is generally pretty good if you're using fresh seed, which I am this time. And the reason I think a lot of people suffer from poor germination with carrots is that they sow the carrots too early, or they don't keep them damp enough. So in my case, obviously I'm sowing them very early, but I'm going to put them in the conservatory for a couple of weeks, just on a bag, so they don't mess up the tiles. And yeah, so it won't be in there very long. As soon as they break surface, they'll go into the greenhouse, and then not long after that, probably about a month after that, they'll go into the polytunnel, and then in about mid-April, something like that, they'll go onto the top of my IBC tanks, which is hopefully high enough to avoid carrot fly. Carrot fly is pretty active in April, towards the end of April. So certainly by the middle of April, you want them up nice and high. I tend to keep them about this high upwards. So they're pretty safe there, although occasionally I do get like a little bit of carrot fly damage, but not very much. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to cover these with seed compost. I'm just using this, which is, you can't see it, can you, on that camera? Levington's Seed and Modular. It's super fine. And I just cover them over with about 1 centimetre of compost, because I'm going to keep an eye on them and keep the surface of the compost damp. I don't want to put a very thick layer of compost over them. If you were sowing them in, say, June, July time, you might want to put a bit thicker layer of compost on, because it would be hard to keep them moist in those sorts of conditions unless you covered the compost with a board of wood or something like that, or some damp hessian cloth or that type of material, or even some folded up fleece. Right, so they're all done. Happy with those. They're going to get some TLC now, as I said, in the conservatory, where it's about 15 degrees centigrade at night at the moment, and sort of 20, 22, something like that during the day. So quite nice. They should germinate really quickly in there, and we should be off. So next up, I'm doing 3 varieties of beetroot for 2 different purposes. Sowing them into this really rough, cheap as chips, multi-purpose compost, which is that. I don't specifically recommend this compost, but this is the way that I just do it nowadays. So I top off my tray like that, then poke it down with my fingers, and then fill the last centimetre, sort of top centimetre, with this super fine Levington's F2, and then if I can find a pen, there we go, I'll just poke a 1 centimetre hole with my pen or with my finger. And, you know, to be honest, I normally do it with my finger. So I'm doing 3 varieties, as I mentioned. I'm doing Pablo, and this is my favoured variety to grow to maturity for really early beetroot. So I'll be harvesting those in May, hopefully. They'll get planted out in the polytunnel, but yeah, they'll get planted out probably towards the end of February, maybe, something like that. And I'm doing bull's blood and golden beetroot for leaves in containers in the greenhouse, and they'll get a bit of supplemental grow light. I find that neither of these varieties do very well in the sort of low light levels and cold weather in sort of February and March. So they're really only suitable for the greenhouse, and they're only really suitable for leaves. I would be sowing my golden beetroot more like, you know, sort of towards the end of February, March sort of time for planting out in April under cover. So yeah, they're really not great golden beetroot. I mean, they're fantastic. The leaves are beautiful in salads, but and they're a beautiful beetroot, but they do like it warm. Unlike the Pablo, which seems to cope much better with the cooler weather. Pablo's a little bit more expensive than Bolt Hardy. Bolt Hardy is also a pretty good alternative for an early harvest. So beetroot seeds are wonderfully big and easy to plant. I'm just putting 2 seeds in each module, and that should give me enough for leaves. And I'm probably going to do 2 seeds for my early ones as well, for the Pablo, just to make sure that I get some germinating. But I might end up having to thin those down a little bit, because I only really want 2 to 3 roots growing, because I want them early, you know, so I don't want too much competition between the roots, between the plants. Right, so next up I'm going to do my cherry bell. These are my favoured radish for growing nice and early, and I'm just going to play around with this. I'm going to do 1 tray, but when I come to plant them out, I'm going to plant some of them in a tray in the conservatory, perhaps. See how it goes. Some of them in a tray in the greenhouse, and some of them in the polytunnel in the ground. And we'll see how the growth varies depending on the different heat and the different light levels. So we'll try and make sure that the conservatory and the greenhouse get the same light levels, but obviously quite significantly different amount of heat. And the polytunnel will get natural daylight and whatever heat you can get in a polytunnel, which is sometimes pretty impressive when these get planted out, which will probably be towards the end of January, as I start to get a little bit of space opening up. We'll see how they do. They should, in theory, all come in kind of like a reasonable succession, with the conservatory ones coming first, then the greenhouse ones, then the polytunnel ones. And just the same, well, not exactly the same, but similar to the way that I did those beetroot, I'm going to put multiple radish seeds in each module. I'm not going to overdo it though, again, because I want these early. So I'm only going to put 3 seeds in each module. But I mean, I try and put 3 in, but often I end up putting 4 in, sometimes 5. And I won't go back and, you know, take any extra out or anything like that, because it's also just another way of getting a kind of succession. You know, if you put 4 in, then that little clump will come a little bit later than a clump that had 3 in it. And if you put 2 in, you know, then that one will come a little bit earlier. So yeah, I'm big into successional sowings, obviously. And I just also, it's just so much quicker, isn't it, to do it like this? And it's not a lot of hard work to sort of go back and correct yourself, but when there's a kind of, you can convince yourself that there's an advantage to being lazy, then that's all to the good. And those looking quite nice, and those were moles seeds again. I tend to do a lot of moles now. I like the packaging. I like, in fact, that although these don't have the type of packaging I like the sealed airtight sort of seal that the moles packages have got on them. I really like that. And I like the fact that moles seems to have a good turnover, so a lot of the seeds are reasonably fresh. Occasionally, obviously, like all seed companies, you're going to get a bad batch, but generally speaking, they're pretty good. And those are all done. Right, so now I'm going to do my early peas. I'm going to do Oregon sugar pod and Lusaka, which is a sugar snap. So Oregon sugar pod is a Monge 2. And I don't bother with the Levington seed and modular for peas. I'm just going to put them straight in to this Chips multi-purpose compost. I do them in a 6-cell tray at this time of year, and I'm going to put 3 seeds in each of the cells because I like a big tray at this time of year because I want them to be fairly big plants when I plant them out, and I will protect them with polythene as well when I put them out, because obviously they're going to get planted out towards the end of January, early February. It's pretty cold at that time of year. Peas don't mind it cold, but they really can't stand, the really harsh winds and, really bad wind chill. So you'd soon lose them unless you're really lucky. And I've already got 2 successions of peas going. Both of those are in the greenhouse, and one's about to be planted out and the other one's looking pretty strong. So I should have a nice succession of peas going. And I'll just poke the peas in to the compost and then just cover them over. And I'll be planting these out sort of at 8 inches or something like that in between each module. I want them planted out reasonably young, obviously, because they're not in fancy root trainers or anything like that, but I do this every year and it's fine. They do really well just in these simple, cheap module trays. So next up, I'm going to do some salad rocket. I normally do wild rocket at this time of year, but this year I've decided I'm going to do salad rocket because it's just quicker growing. And it will obviously go to seed on me. And as a result of that, I'm just doing this 9-cell tray. And I'll just do a 9-cell tray like every few weeks. And this first batch will go in probably in a container in the greenhouse or in the polytunnel. I put them in a fairly big module so that I can keep them reasonably warm and under grow lights for a little while. And I've also just put 2 or 3 seeds per module. Spilled a couple there. Finally, I'm going to do some parsley, some peppermint and some celery. And all of these really, generally, you just do on the surface. I've just found over the years that actually it works better when you do them with a fine dusting of compost, as some people would probably do vermiculite. I prefer a fine dusting of compost. So in theory, they really, like to germinate in the light. So that's the reason to not cover them. And they are tiny little seeds. So what I'm going to do in these, I think, is I'm going to do half of them kind of covered and half of them uncovered, and we'll see. So the celery is just my super early succession that I'm going to put in the polytunnel, and I've got some of this nice parsley in the polytunnel and in the greenhouse actually, but that'll go to seed in spring. So this is just my follow-on first succession of parsley. You might put a bit of this on the kitchen windowsill or something as well. So whether you cover them or dust them over with compost or just leave them exposed, it's you've really got to keep on top of keeping them moist. So either dust them with a sprayer or a little bottle top watering can, which is what I generally do. So I've got some of that fine seed starting compost. Just put a little bit in there. I'll sort it out in a minute. And obviously I'll cover the parsley as well there. So so I just tap that down. I think, as I said, because it's such a thin layer that I've put there, like 1 or 2 millimeters or something along those lines, I think they're still going to get, or they still seem to get, enough light to germinate okay. For those, I just press them gently down into the compost. You can't actually see the peppermint, it's so small. So it's making good contact. And then we're done. Right, so these are all going to go on the seed starting shelf in my conservatory. As I say, it's nice and warm in there during the day. Assuming the sun's shining, and it's reasonable. As I said, I think it's about 15 degrees most nights. It could drop down to 12 or something like that, but everything down here will be fine and should germinate fine with that sort of temperature. The peppermint and the parsley and the celery, I'll just put those over one of my grow lights, so they're just like a little bit warmer. Just the heat from the grow light will just give them a little bit of a boost. And yeah, the other thing is I just noticed that all of my peppers have started to germinate now as well. So those are the ones I sowed back in December. They're the ones that are going to go into the greenhouse. And I'm quite excited to see the greenhouse not looking in its like winter mode at the moment, which is a bit bleak, but in its lush spring sort of configuration. And keep looking at photos of that and looking forward to it. I enjoy all the seasons, gardening in all seasons, but particularly like the spring. Anyway, my name's Steve. This is the Seaside Kitchen Garden and Allotment channel, and I'll see you soon.